There is a quiet room in Omaha, Nebraska. It is not filled with flashing screens, ringing phones, or the frantic energy of a Wall Street trading floor. It is, for the most part, a sanctuary of silence. In this room, a man sits in a comfortable chair, and for hours on end he does the one thing that has made him arguably the greatest wealth creator in human history. He reads. He is not skimming headlines. He is not scrolling through a social media feed. He is engaged in a deep, methodical, almost monastic practice of information consumption. Warren Buffett, the oracle of this quiet room, estimates that he spends 80% of his working day, even now in his 90s, simply reading. This isn't a hobby. It is not a leisurely pastime to fill the hours. It is his job. It is the engine of his success, the primary activity that has compounded a small partnership in the 1950s into the global fortress of Berkshire Hathaway. We live in an age that venerates speed, brevity, and efficiency. We are told to hack our lives, to consume information in bite-sized summaries, to get the gist and move on. We are, as a culture, engaged in a massive exercise of information snacking, grabbing intellectual empty calories from an endless buffet of distraction. And in the face of this modern trend, Buffett's habit seems almost absurd, an anachronism from a forgotten time. 500 pages a day. Annual reports, industry journals, biographies, histories, newspapers. A relentless, voracious, all-consuming flood of text. What could possibly be the purpose of such an extreme practice? The answer is the core of our exploration today. The central thesis is this. Warren Buffett's lifelong habit of deep reading is not about accumulating facts. It is a core business strategy designed to build a superior mental infrastructure. It is the ultimate antidote to the shallow thinking of the modern world. Through this practice, he achieves a massive, continuous inflow of broad information that allows him to accumulate knowledge that compounds over time, just like money. This compounding knowledge creates an ever-expanding latticework of mental models, enabling a level of pattern recognition and decision-making that is simply unavailable to those who only skim the surface. This is not about being smart. It is about building a system for thinking that makes you smarter over time. It is the single highest return activity anyone aspiring to true success, in business or in life, can possibly engage in. Today, we will deconstruct this system. We will move beyond the simple advice of read more and dissect the machinery of how this practice actually works. We will explore 5 fundamental pillars that make up this knowledge engine. First, we will examine how reading creates an information arbitrage engine, giving him a distinct and powerful edge over a market obsessed with noise. Second, we will dive deep into the magical mathematics of the compounding of knowledge, understanding how learning, like interest, can create exponential growth in your own mind. Third, we will unpack the lattice work of mental models, showing how reading across diverse disciplines creates a toolkit for thinking that specialists can never match. Fourth, we will explore how this practice is a tool for the deliberate cultivation of temperament, forging the emotional resilience necessary to survive and thrive in a volatile world. And finally, we will reveal how reading acts as a time machine, allowing him to learn from the countless mistakes of others without paying the price himself. This is the journey from information to insight, from reading to riches. This is the secret to infinite knowledge. Let us begin with the first pillar, the very foundation of how reading translates into tangible financial advantage, the information arbitrage engine. At its heart, arbitrage is the act of exploiting a price difference between 2 or more markets. Information arbitrage is a more subtle and powerful form of this concept. It is the practice of exploiting the gap between perceived reality and actual reality. It's not about getting illegal inside tips. It is about developing a more accurate map of the world than everyone else by consuming and processing information more deeply and broadly. While the market is reacting to a sensational headline, the information arbitrageur is quietly reading the footnotes of the company's financial statements, the trade journals of its industry, and the history of its management. They are profiting from the market's laziness, its short attention span, and its tendency to react to emotion rather than fact. Buffett's entire career is a testament to this principle, but no story illustrates it more perfectly than his encounter with the great salad oil scandal. The year was 1963. American Express was a titan of American business, a blue-chip stock synonymous with trust and stability. Its core businesses were travelers' checks and credit cards, pillars of the post-war economic boom. But it had a smaller, lesser-known subsidiary involved in warehousing. This subsidiary issued receipts for commodities stored in its tanks, and banks would lend money against these receipts. It was a mundane, profitable business until a man named Tino De Angelis entered the picture. De Angelis was a charismatic, larger-than-life commodities trader from the Bronx who dealt primarily in one thing: salad oil. He began filling his company's storage tanks, located in Bayonne, New Jersey, with massive quantities of soybean and cottonseed oil. American Express's warehousing unit issued the receipts, and De Angelis used these receipts to secure over $150 million in loans from dozens of banks. Wall Street loved him. He was the salad oil king. But there was a problem. The tanks weren't full of salad oil. They were mostly full of seawater, with a thin layer of oil floating on top. When inspectors came to check, they would dip their measuring sticks into the top layer and see what they expected to see. It was a fraud of breathtaking simplicity and scale. In November of 1963, the House of Cards collapsed. De Angelis's company filed for bankruptcy, the truth about the empty tanks came out, and Wall Street was plunged into chaos. The banks that had loaned him money were facing catastrophic losses, and since the loans were secured by receipts from American Express, all eyes turned to the blue-chip giant. The central question was terrifying. Was American Express legally on the hook for the fraudulent receipts issued by its subsidiary? The market didn't wait for an answer. Panic set in. The media narrative was one of doom and gloom. This was a scandal of epic proportions, and it threatened to bring down one of America's most trusted institutions. The stock price of American Express was obliterated, plummeting from over $60 a share to as low as $35 in a matter of weeks. The consensus on Wall Street was clear: sell, get out now before it goes to zero. The story was simple, powerful, and terrifying, and almost everyone believed it. But in his quiet office in Omaha, Warren Buffett was not listening to the noise. He was reading. He read the initial reports. He read the panicked analyses. But then he did something the rest of the market was too scared or too lazy to do. He went deeper. He began to build his own mosaic of information, piece by painstaking piece. He started with the numbers, reading the American Express annual report, trying to understand the scale of the potential liability versus the immense profitability of the core businesses. Then, he moved from the page to the real world, applying a technique he learned from the legendary investor Philip Fisher, a technique called scuttlebutt. He decided to read the reality of the situation on the ground. He left his office and started visiting banks, talking to loan officers and tellers. He went to travel agencies. He visited restaurants and hotels. He wasn't asking them about the salad oil scandal. He was asking them about their business with American Express. Did people still trust the traveler's checks? Were merchants still happily accepting the credit card? The answer he got, over and over, was a resounding yes. The panic that had gripped Wall Street had not infected Main Street. The average person either hadn't heard of the scandal or didn't care. To them, the name American Express still meant security and convenience. Its brand, its true asset, was untouched. Buffett even conducted his own little experiments, taking his friends out to dinner and watching closely to see if other patrons were still using their Amex cards with the same confidence as before. They were. He then talked to competitors of American Express. He asked them if they were seeing a surge in business from customers fleeing Amex. They weren't. The fear was entirely contained within the financial world. Armed with this ground truth information, Buffett concluded that the market was making a classic mistake. It was pricing the entire company based on the problems of one small firewalled subsidiary. He calculated that even in a worst-case scenario where Amex had to cover all the fraudulent loans, the per-share loss would be manageable. The company's immense earning power from its traveler's check and credit card operations would quickly overwhelm the one-time hit. The market was selling a diamond because of a tiny flaw it mistook for a fatal crack. So Buffett acted. He began buying American Express stock aggressively. He invested $13 million, which at the time represented a staggering 40% of his investment partnership's total capital. It was the single largest investment he had ever made. His partners were nervous. The experts on Wall Street thought he was insane. But Buffett wasn't betting on a stock. He was betting on his superior information, on the more accurate map of reality he had built through diligent, first-hand research. Within 2 years, his faith was vindicated. The legal issues were resolved for a fraction of the feared cost, the market realized its mistake, and the stock price soared. Buffett's partnership made a profit of over $20 million. It was a company-making investment, one that proved that deep reading and research weren't just academic exercises. They were a license to print money. He had arbitraged the gap between Wall Street's fear and Main Street's reality. The power of Buffett's approach during the Salad Oil scandal is rooted in his ability to overcome two powerful psychological principles that trap the vast majority of investors: the availability heuristic and herd behavior. These are not character flaws, they are deeply ingrained cognitive biases, mental shortcuts hardwired into our brains for evolutionary reasons, which prove disastrous in modern financial markets. The availability heuristic states that our minds tend to judge the likelihood of an event based on how easily we can recall examples of it. In 1963, the most available information about American Express was the scandal. It was vivid, it was sensational, it was everywhere in the newspapers and on the evening news. The story of Tino DeAngelis, the phantom oil tanks, the massive fraud. It was a dramatic narrative that was easy to grasp and remember. In contrast, the data about the steady, boring profitability of travelers' checks and the nuanced legal arguments about corporate liability were complex, dry, and far less mentally available. The brain, seeking efficiency, latches onto the vivid, available story and bases its judgment on that alone. Wall Street wasn't reacting to a detailed analysis of American Express's balance sheet, it was reacting to the mental movie of seawater in a tank. Buffett's relentless reading and research was a conscious strategy to fight this bias. He deliberately sought out the less available, more boring information because he knew that's where the truth and the profit resided. This was compounded by the second principle, herd behavior. Human beings are social animals. For millennia, our survival depended on sticking with the tribe. Dissent could mean being cast out, which was a death sentence. This instinct manifests in financial markets as a powerful urge to do what everyone else is doing. When everyone is selling, a primal fear kicks in, the fear of being left behind, the fear of knowing something that everyone else doesn't. Selling feels safe, even if it's irrational, because it provides the psychological comfort of being part of the consensus. In the case of American Express, the herd was stampeding for the exits. The greatest financial minds on Wall Street, the supposed experts, were all selling. To stand against that tide, to start buying when every signal says sell, requires an almost superhuman level of independent thought and emotional control. Buffett's reading habit is the source of this control. His conviction wasn't based on bravado or a contrarian whim. It was built on a foundation of deeply researched facts. He wasn't just guessing that the herd was wrong. He had done the work to prove it to himself. His information advantage inoculated him against the social pressure to conform. He could watch the stampede with detachment because his reading of the situation, both literally and figuratively, told him the danger was imaginary. He had built a fortress of facts around his mind, and the emotional contagion of the market couldn't get in. So how can we translate this powerful strategy into our own lives? We can adopt a practical mental model known as the scuttlebutt method, a term coined by the investor Philip Fisher, whose work heavily influenced Buffett. This is a blueprint for becoming an information arbitrager in your own field, whether you're an investor, an entrepreneur, or a professional making a career decision. It's a step-by-step process for building a ground-up understanding that goes far beyond the surface-level information everyone else consumes. Step 1 is to identify your target of inquiry. This could be a company you're thinking of investing in, a new industry you're considering entering, or even a potential employer. Step 2 is to resist the urge to start with the expert opinions. Don't immediately go to the analyst reports, the news headlines, or the top 10 inches listicles. These are sources of second-hand, pre-digested information. They are the market consensus. Instead, you begin by creating a scuttlebutt checklist, a map of primary and peripheral information sources. Step 3 is to execute the checklist. This means getting your hands dirty. For a public company, it means reading not just the latest annual report, but the last 5. Read the 10K filings, especially the footnotes in the risk factors section that most people skip. But that's just the beginning. The real scuttlebutt lies beyond the official documents. Read the industry's trade journals. What are the key trends and challenges that the CEOs aren't talking about in their shareholder letters? Find the company's biggest competitors and read their Times annual reports. They will often inadvertently reveal the weaknesses of your target company. Go to online forums where customers of the company congregate. What are their real complaints and praises? If possible, and always ethically, try to talk to people in the ecosystem. Talk to former employees. Talk to suppliers. Talk to the frontline salespeople. Each conversation, each document, is a single data point. Individually, they may not mean much, but when you collect enough of them, you begin to assemble a mosaic, a detailed, high-resolution picture of reality that is far more accurate than the blurry snapshot the rest of the world is looking at. This systematic approach to information gathering is the practical application of Buffett's reading habit. It is hard work. It takes time. And that is precisely why it is so valuable, because most people will never do it. The antithesis of this deep, methodical approach is what we can call the path of the 99%, the path of the hot tip chaser. This is the default mode of operation in our information-saturated world. The hot tip chaser outsources their thinking. Their decisions are not the result of a rigorous process of inquiry, but a reaction to an external stimulus. In finance, this is the person who buys a stock because they saw a confident-sounding person recommended on television, or because a cryptocurrency is trending on social media. They haven't read the white paper, they don't understand the underlying technology or the business model, but they are terrified of missing out. The story is exciting, the momentum seems real, and the herd is running in that direction. The perfect example of this mindset was the dot-com bubble of the late 1990s. Millions of ordinary people poured their life savings into companies that were little more than a catchy name and a business plan sketched on a napkin. They had no profits, no revenues, and in many cases, no viable product. But they had a hot story. They were going to change the world with the new economy. Anyone who dared to ask for old-fashioned metrics like a price-to-earnings ratio was dismissed as a dinosaur. The hot tip, the exciting narrative, replaced the hard work of fundamental analysis. People were buying stocks without ever reading the company's SEC filings, documents that were freely available and often painted a terrifying picture of cash burn and operational chaos. When the bubble burst in 2000, trillions of dollars of wealth were vaporized. It was a brutal lesson in the cost of intellectual laziness. The hot tip chaser makes decisions based on the heat of the moment, while the scuttlebutt practitioner makes decisions based on the light of deep knowledge. One path leads to constant anxiety and eventual loss. The other leads to conviction, patience, and long-term success. The direct financial connection of this information arbitrage engine is profound and quantifiable. When Buffett invested in American Express, he was executing a strategy that manifests directly on the balance sheet of an investor's portfolio. He was buying an asset for significantly less than its intrinsic value. This difference is what Benjamin Graham, Buffett's mentor, called the margin of safety. A margin of safety is not just a hope or a guess. It is a tangible buffer against error and bad luck. But here is the crucial insight. The size of your margin of safety is a direct function of the quality of your information. If you know more about a business than the market does, you can see value where others see risk. The $13 million Buffett invested in Amex was deployed at a moment of maximum fear, allowing him to purchase the immense, stable earning power of the traveler's check and credit card businesses at a ridiculously low price. This led to an astronomical return on invested capital. The financial advantage is twofold. First, it allows for the purchase of assets at a discount, leading to outsized capital gains. Second, and perhaps more importantly, it dramatically reduces risk. Buffett's deep research gave him the conviction to hold his position even if the stock went down further in the short term. He knew the underlying value was there. The hot tip chaser, on the other hand, has no such conviction. Their belief is fragile, built on someone else's opinion. At the first sign of trouble, they panic and sell, often locking in a loss. Thus, information arbitrage doesn't just make you more money, it prevents you from losing the money you have. It is the ultimate tool for both wealth creation and capital preservation, turning diligent reading from a soft skill into a hard financial asset. This brings us to our second pillar, the elegant and powerful concept that underpins the entire system, the compounding of knowledge. We are all familiar with the magic of compounding interest. Albert Einstein supposedly called it the eighth wonder of the world. A small sum of money invested wisely can grow into a fortune over time as the interest earned begins to earn interest of its own. It is a slow, almost invisible process at first, but over decades, the curve sweeps upward into exponential growth. Buffett's core insight is that knowledge works in exactly the same way. Every fact you learn, every concept you master, is not an isolated piece of data. It is intellectual capital that accrues interest, making it easier and faster to acquire the next piece of knowledge. The more you know, the more you can know. This is the secret to building a truly formidable mind. It is not about raw intelligence, it is about the patient, long-term accumulation of a broad knowledge base. To understand this in practice, we must go back to Buffett's own beginning. The story doesn't start in a boardroom, it starts in his father's library and the Omaha Public Library. As a child, Warren was not just a casual reader, he was a completist. He set out to read every single book in his father's collection that had anything to do with business, finance, or the stock market. When he finished those, he moved on to the public library and did the same thing. He devoured books on salesmanship, like Dale Carnegie's How to Win Friends and Influence People. He read biographies of great industrialists. He read books with titles like 1,000 Ways to Make $1,000, which gave him his early ideas for businesses like his pinball machine venture. By the time he was a teenager, he had already built up a significant base of practical business knowledge. Each book was a deposit into his mental bank account. But the true compounding moment, the spark that ignited the exponential curve, came when he was 19 years old, a student at the University of Nebraska. He was browsing in a bookstore and came across a book by his future mentor, Benjamin Graham, titled The Intelligent Investor. Reading that book changed his life. But here is the crucial point. The book had such a profound impact on him precisely because of all the reading he had already done. The concepts Graham laid out. Mr. Market, the margin of safety, treating a stock as a piece of a business, were not just abstract ideas to him. They were a powerful, coherent framework that suddenly organized all the disparate pieces of knowledge he had been accumulating for the past decade. The thousands of facts he knew about different businesses, the stories he had read about market booms and busts, the practical experience he had from his own small ventures. All of this prior knowledge acted as fertile soil in which Graham's seeds of wisdom could take root and flourish. If he had read The Intelligent Investor in a vacuum, without that pre-existing foundation, it would have been just another interesting book. But because his mind was already primed with so much related information, the book acted as a catalyst, fusing everything he knew into a powerful, cohesive worldview. This is the compounding of knowledge in action. The initial learning may seem slow and fragmented, but it builds a foundation. Then, a key idea comes along that connects everything, and your understanding leaps to a whole new level. Your intellectual capital has just earned a massive dividend. From that day forward, every new piece of information Buffett consumed was processed through the powerful filter of Graham's framework, making his learning even more efficient and effective. The curve had started to steepen. The biological basis for this phenomenon lies in the principles of neural plasticity and associative learning. Your brain is not a static storage device. It is a dynamic living network of around 86 billion neurons, and the connections between these neurons, the synapses, are constantly being formed, strengthened, and pruned. Every time you learn something new, you are physically altering the structure of your brain. You are creating or reinforcing a neural pathway. Think of your knowledge base as a vast, growing web. When you first learn about a topic, you create a few isolated nodes. As you read more, you create more nodes, and more importantly, you start to build connections between them. Associative learning is the process by which your brain links new information to existing information. It's far easier to remember a new fact if you can hang it on a pre-existing mental hook. This is why a rich, broad knowledge base is so powerful. When you read something new, your brain automatically searches its vast web of existing knowledge for relevant connections. If you have a dense, interconnected web, the new information will have hundreds of potential hooks to attach to. It will be integrated, understood, and retained far more effectively. If your web is sparse and fragmented, the new information has nothing to stick to. It remains isolated and is quickly forgotten. Buffett's 500 pages a day is a relentless exercise in spinning this neural web. He isn't just adding new nodes, he is constantly strengthening the connections between them, creating a rich, dense, and incredibly powerful cognitive architecture. This is why the rich get richer in knowledge as well as money. The initial effort is the hardest, but once you build a critical mass of understanding, learning becomes easier and more fruitful. Your knowledge starts to compound automatically. To harness this incredible power, you can implement a mental model known as the 5-hour rule, a concept identified in the habits of many ultra-successful people, including Benjamin Franklin and Elon Musk. It is a simple but profound commitment. Dedicate at least 1 hour per day, 5 hours per week, to deliberate learning and practice. This is not about working more. It is about systematically investing in your greatest asset, your mind. Here is a practical blueprint for implementing the 5-hour rule in your own life. First, you must block the time. Put it in your calendar just as you would a critical meeting. Treat it as non-negotiable. This hour is sacred. Turn off your phone, close your email, and eliminate all distractions. Second, structure your week around the different modes of learning. For example, Monday is for reading. This is the core input phase. Choose a book, a collection of in-depth articles, or a research paper that expands your knowledge in a key area. Tuesday is for reflection. Information without reflection is just noise. Use this hour to journal about what you read on Monday. Draw mind maps to connect the new ideas to what you already know. Ask yourself, how does this apply to my life, my business, my goals? Wednesday is for experimentation. Knowledge is useless until it is applied. Take one small idea from your reading and put it into practice. This could be trying a new productivity technique, using a new line of questioning with a client, or analyzing a problem using a new mental model. The goal is to move from the theoretical to the practical. Thursday is for discussion. Share what you're learning with a trusted colleague, a mentor, or a mastermind group. The act of explaining a concept to someone else is one of the most powerful ways to solidify your own understanding. It will expose the gaps in your thinking and allow you to see the idea from new perspectives. Finally, Friday is for consolidation. Use this hour to review your week of learning. Write a short summary of the key insights. What was the most important thing you learned? What will you do differently next week as a result? This 5-day cycle creates a powerful rhythm of input, processing, application, and reinforcement. It turns learning from a passive, haphazard activity into a disciplined, systematic practice that guarantees your knowledge will compound over time. The antithesis to this disciplined approach is the just-in-time learner. This is the default mode for most people in the modern economy. The just-in-time learner only seeks out information when they are faced with an immediate problem they cannot solve. Their computer program has a bug, so they Google the specific error message, find a snippet of code on a forum, paste it in, and once the problem is solved, they immediately forget the solution and the underlying principle. They need to create a presentation, so they search for a template, fill in the blanks, and learn nothing about the art of visual communication or persuasive storytelling. Their learning is purely reactive, shallow, and temporary. They are not building a foundation of knowledge, they are just patching holes. Think of the difference between an apprentice and a gig worker. An apprentice might spend the first few years sweeping floors and doing menial tasks, but all the while they are absorbing the principles of the craft, building a deep, foundational understanding. A gig worker, on the other hand, learns one very specific, isolated task to complete a job, and then moves on to the next unrelated task. The apprentice's knowledge is compounding, making them more valuable and capable over time. The gig worker's knowledge is stagnant. They are perpetually starting from zero. The just-in-time learner may feel efficient in the short term, but over the long term, they fall further and further behind. They can solve today's specific problem, but they lack the broad context and deep understanding needed to anticipate and solve tomorrow's bigger, more complex challenges. The direct financial connection of compounding knowledge is best understood through the lens of human capital. Your human capital is the sum total of your skills, your knowledge, and your experience. It is the most valuable asset you will ever own, and its value can either appreciate or depreciate over time. Engaging in continuous learning through a practice like the 5-hour rule is the most direct way to invest in and grow the value of your human capital. Every book you read, every new skill you acquire, is like making a deposit. This increased human capital manifests financially in several ways. First, it directly increases your earning potential. The more you know, the more valuable you are to the market, whether as an employee or an entrepreneur. You can command a higher salary, charge higher fees, and build more successful businesses. Second, it expands your circle of competence, a concept central to Buffett's investment philosophy. Your circle of competence is the set of subjects and industries that you understand deeply. The wider your circle, the more opportunities you can analyze and act upon with confidence. A small circle means you can only see a few good pitches. A large, ever-expanding circle means you can see opportunities everywhere. Finally, a vast knowledge base is a powerful tool for risk management. The more you understand about history, business cycles, and human psychology, the less likely you are to make catastrophic financial mistakes. The $20 you spend on a book about the history of financial bubbles could save you from losing your life savings in the next one. The return on investment is nearly infinite. Compounding knowledge doesn't just fill your mind, it directly and inevitably fills your wallet. This leads us logically to the third pillar, the structural framework that gives compounding knowledge its true power, the latticework of mental models. This concept, most famously articulated by Buffett's partner, Charlie Munger, is the secret to moving beyond mere fact-gathering to achieving genuine wisdom. Munger has said you can't know it all. What you need is a latticework of mental models in your head. And with that system, things gradually get to fit together in a way that enhances cognition. A mental model is simply a representation of how something works. It's a concept or a framework that helps you make sense of the world. The problem is that most people, especially highly educated specialists, operate with only one or two models, usually the ones from their own narrow field. The accountant sees the world as a collection of debits and credits. The marketer sees it as a set of funnels and brands. The engineer sees it as a system of inputs and outputs. They are, in Munger's words, like a man with only a hammer, to whom every problem looks like a nail. The latticework approach is the antidote. It involves actively collecting the big, powerful models from all the major disciplines: physics, biology, psychology, economics, history, engineering, and hanging them on a mental latticework so they can be used in combination to analyze any problem. Buffett's reading habit is not just about finance. It is a decades-long project to build the most robust latticework of mental models in the world. The perfect anecdote to illustrate this is the acquisition of See's Candies in 1972. This was a watershed moment for Buffett and Munger. Up to that point, Buffett had been a pure disciple of Ben Graham, focused on cigar-butt investing, buying deeply undervalued, often mediocre companies with one last puff of value in them. It was a numbers-driven, quantitative approach. See's Candies was different. It was a high-quality, family-owned chocolate company based in California. By Graham's quantitative metrics, it was expensive. The See family was asking for $25 million, which was a significant premium over the company's book value. The old Buffett, the man with only the Graham hammer, would have walked away immediately. But Charlie Munger pushed him to look at the business through a different set of lenses, a multi-model approach. First, they applied a model from psychology, the power of brand and association. See's wasn't just selling chocolate, it was selling nostalgia, tradition, and the feeling of giving a trusted, high-quality gift. Customers had powerful emotional connections to the brand, built over decades. This psychological asset didn't show up on the balance sheet, but it was immensely valuable. Second, they used a model from microeconomics, pricing power. Because of this strong brand loyalty, See's could raise its prices year after year to cover inflation and increase profits, without losing customers. This ability to command price is one of the single most important characteristics of a great business. A generic chocolate maker couldn't do this. See's could. Third, they implicitly used a model from physics, the concept of momentum. A business that has been successful and beloved for 50 years has a powerful inertia. It is likely to continue being successful and beloved unless a powerful force acts upon it. Finally, they layered on their traditional financial models, calculating the return on tangible assets, which was extraordinarily high because the business didn't require much capital to grow. By combining these models from psychology, economics, and physics with their financial expertise, they were able to see that See's Candies was a truly exceptional business. They paid the $25 million. It was a turning point. It taught them that it's, quote, far better to buy a wonderful company at a fair price than a fair company at a wonderful price. See's has since generated over $2 billion in pre-tax earnings for Berkshire Hathaway and required very little additional capital investment. That purchase, which would have been impossible with a single model approach, became the prototype for future Berkshire blockbusters like Coca-Cola and American Express. It was a triumph of the latticework. The psychological principle that the latticework approach helps to overcome is one of the most insidious traps for smart people, the Einstellung effect, combined with confirmation bias. The Einstellung effect is a German term for the way a person's ingrained perspective or initial idea can prevent them from seeing a better solution or a more accurate view of a problem. It's a mental roadblock. When an expert in a particular field is presented with a problem, their brain immediately defaults to the familiar models and solutions of their discipline. This is efficient, but it can also blind them to novel or superior solutions that lie just outside their domain. Confirmation bias then kicks in, causing them to actively seek out information that confirms their initial hypothesis and to ignore or discount any evidence that contradicts it. The specialist isn't just blind to other possibilities. They are actively working to reinforce their own blindness. A multidisciplinary latticework of mental models is a powerful antidote to this. It forces you to intentionally put on different pairs of glasses. When you ask, "What does the biological model of an ecosystem tell me about the competitive landscape in this industry?" Or, "How does the psychological principle of social proof explain this consumer trend?" you are deliberately breaking out of your default thinking patterns. You are forcing yourself to attack the problem from multiple, often contradictory angles. This process short-circuits the Einstellung effect and actively fights confirmation bias. It doesn't guarantee you'll find the right answer, but it dramatically increases the probability that you will see the problem in its true, multifaceted complexity rather than the oversimplified version your specialized training wants you to see. Building your own latticework can seem daunting, but it can be systematized with a mental model we can call the Munger two-step. Step 1 is to build your toolkit. This is a conscious, lifelong project of reading broadly, outside of your area of expertise, with the specific goal of harvesting mental models. You don't need to become an expert in physics, but you need to understand the big ideas, like thermodynamics and critical mass. You don't need a PhD in psychology, but you must understand the major cognitive biases. A great way to start is to create a starter kit of 5 to 10 powerful multidisciplinary models. For example, 1. Inversion from algebra. Instead of asking how to achieve success, ask what would guarantee failure and then avoid it. 2. Redundancy from engineering. The most critical systems need backups and failsafes. 3. Feedback loops from biology. Understand how systems can be self-reinforcing, either in a virtuous or vicious cycle. 4. Social proof from psychology. People are heavily influenced by what they see others doing. 5. Margin of safety from engineering. Build in a buffer between the load a system must carry and its breaking point. For each model, write a one-page summary in your own words with an example of how it applies in a domain outside its origin. Actively curate and grow this toolkit over time. Step 2 is to use your toolkit with a checklist. Before making any important decision, a major investment, a strategic business pivot, a significant career change, you must run the problem through your checklist of mental models. Charlie Munger himself uses checklists to ensure he doesn't miss anything. Your checklist might ask, have I inverted the problem? What cognitive biases, like social proof or loss aversion, are likely at play here for me and for others? Where is the margin of safety in this plan? What are the potential second and third order consequences? Is this a system with positive or negative feedback loops? This simple process transforms the abstract concept of a latticework into a concrete, repeatable decision-making algorithm. It forces a pause between stimulus and response, and in that pause, it allows for a more rational, multifaceted, and robust analysis. The antithesis of the latticework builder is the man with a hammer. This is the hyper-specialist who has spent their entire career honing one specific tool. They are brilliant within their narrow domain, often celebrated as a leading expert. But when faced with a problem that doesn't fit their model, they are either useless or, far more dangerously, they try to force the problem to fit their tool. The most tragic and large-scale example of this was the lead-up to the 2008 financial crisis. The financial world was dominated by quants, men and women with PhDs in physics and mathematics who had become the high priests of Wall Street. Their hammer was the sophisticated mathematical risk model, particularly the value at risk (VAR) model. These models, based on historical data and assuming normal distribution of returns, told the banks that their portfolios of complex mortgage-backed securities were incredibly safe. The quants were brilliant mathematicians, but they were men with only one hammer. They failed to incorporate models from other disciplines. They ignored the psychological model of greed and fear, which showed that incentives within the mortgage industry were creating a feedback loop of declining lending standards. They ignored the historical model, which showed that asset bubbles fueled by debt and euphoria always, without exception, end in a crash. And they ignored the engineering model of system dynamics, which would have shown that the interconnectedness of global finance meant that a failure in one small part of the system, subprime mortgages in the US, could cascade and bring the entire structure down. Their hyper-specialization was not a strength, it was a catastrophic weakness. The latticework approach of a Buffett or a Munger would have immediately seen the glaring multidisciplinary risks that the one-dimensional experts completely missed. The direct financial connection of using a latticework of mental models is that it allows you to accurately assess the quality of a business or an investment, an attribute that is notoriously difficult to quantify on a simple spreadsheet. As we saw with See's Candies, attributes like brand loyalty, pricing power, and management integrity are psychological and qualitative, yet they are the true drivers of long-term financial returns. A standard financial analysis, the hammer of most investors, might miss these entirely. By applying a multi-model approach, you can identify these durable competitive advantages, or moats, that allow a company to generate high returns on capital for decades. This directly translates into superior investment performance. In a business context, this approach to decision-making leads to better capital allocation. A CEO with a latticework in their head is less likely to pursue a disastrous, ego-driven acquisition, because their psychological models will alert them to the dangers of hubris and the winner's curse. They are more likely to build resilient systems because their engineering models will scream for redundancy and margins of safety. This leads to a business that is not only more profitable in the good times, but also far more robust and able to survive the inevitable bad times. Ultimately, the latticework of mental models is a machine for improving judgment. And in the world of business and finance, judgment is the single most valuable and most highly compensated skill there is. This recognition of human fallibility leads us to the fourth pillar, a more subtle but equally crucial benefit of a deep reading habit, the deliberate cultivation of temperament. If a great strategy and a brilliant analytical mind are the engine of a car, then temperament is the driver. Without a calm, rational, and patient driver, the most powerful engine will inevitably crash. Buffett has famously said that the most important qualities for an investor are temperament, not intellect. In a world that is volatile, uncertain, and filled with emotional traps, the ability to control one's own impulses, to think clearly under pressure, and to maintain a long-term perspective is the ultimate competitive advantage. A life spent reading history, biographies, and market chronicles is not just an accumulation of knowledge, it is a form of mental training, a deliberate practice for forging an unshakable emotional core. There is no better illustration of Buffett's temperament than his behavior during the stock market crash of 1987, known as Black Monday. On October 19th of that year, the Dow Jones Industrial Average plunged 508 points, a drop of 22.6% in a single day. To this day, it remains the largest one-day percentage loss in the index's history. The crash was sudden, violent, and global. Computerized trading programs, which were then a new phenomenon, created a vicious feedback loop of selling, overwhelming the market's capacity to function. Panic was everywhere. The screens were a sea of red. Fortunes were being wiped out in a matter of hours. The dominant emotion was pure, primal fear. In trading rooms across Wall Street, people were screaming, crying, and staring in stunned disbelief. The narrative was that this was the end of the financial world as we knew it, the beginning of a new Great Depression. But in Omaha, Warren Buffett was not panicking. He wasn't even watching the screen. He was, as usual, in his office reading. When a colleague informed him of the historic collapse, his response was calm and measured. He saw the event not as a catastrophe but as an opportunity. Why? Because he had seen this movie before, hundreds of times, in the pages of the books he had read. He had read detailed histories of the crash of 1929, the panic of 1907, the South Sea bubble of the 1720s, and countless other manias and panics throughout history. His reading had taught him a fundamental truth. Markets are driven by human emotion, and human emotion swings between the extremes of greed and fear. He knew that panics were a recurring, if unpleasant, feature of the capitalist system. They were not a sign of the end of the world, but rather a periodic and predictable cleansing of excess and speculation. His famous maxim, "Be fearful when others are greedy, and greedy when others are fearful," is not just a clever aphorism. It is the direct operational output of a temperament forged by a deep study of financial history. On Black Monday, Berkshire Hathaway's portfolio lost over $300 million in value on paper. For most people, a loss of that magnitude would be a stomach-churning, terrifying experience. For Buffett, it was just Mr. Market having one of his periodic psychotic episodes. He did not sell a single share. In the weeks and months that followed, as fear still gripped the market, he did the opposite. He began to use Berkshire's immense cash reserves to buy shares of wonderful businesses, like Coca-Cola, at prices that were far cheaper than they had been just a short time before. His historical perspective, gained through decades of reading, allowed him to see the panic not as a threat, but as an extraordinary buying opportunity. His temperament was his greatest asset. The psychological principles that Buffett's temperament allows him to master are prospect theory and its most famous component, loss aversion. Developed by Nobel laureates Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky, prospect theory describes how people make decisions under uncertainty. One of its key findings is that humans are not perfectly rational economic actors. Our decisions are heavily influenced by our emotions and cognitive biases. The most powerful of these is loss aversion. Experiments have shown that for most people, the psychological pain of losing a certain amount of money is roughly twice as powerful as the pleasure of gaining the same amount. This is a deeply wired evolutionary trait. For our ancestors on the savannah, losing their food supply was a far more significant event than finding an extra food supply. The former meant death, the latter was just a bonus. Our brains are therefore hardwired with a powerful alarm system that goes off when we face the prospect of a loss. In a market crash, this alarm is blaring. The falling numbers on the screen trigger the same primal fear circuits that a predator would have triggered thousands of years ago. The overwhelming impulse is to make the pain stop, which means selling. This is why most investors buy high, in a state of euphoria, and sell low, in a state of panic. Buffett's reading habit acts as a form of long-term, self-administered cognitive behavioral therapy. By repeatedly exposing his mind to the stories of past panics in the calm, detached environment of his study, he has effectively desensitized himself. He has trained the rational, analytical part of his brain, the prefrontal cortex, to override the primal fear signals coming from his amygdala. He has experienced the emotional roller coaster of a market crash 100 times over without ever losing a dollar, simply by reading about it. This vicarious experience is what gives him the almost inhuman ability to remain calm and rational when everyone else is losing their mind. We can actively cultivate this kind of temperament by adopting a mental model we can call the Stoic reading practice. This is a specific, curated reading program designed not just to inform, but to train your emotional responses. The practice consists of a 3-part reading cycle, repeated continuously. First, read one great biography of a leader who faced and overcame immense adversity. Think of Abraham Lincoln during the Civil War, Ulysses S. Grant in his darkest moments, or Winston Churchill in 1940. As you read, focus not on the historical facts, but on their internal state. How did they manage their fear, their doubt, their exhaustion? What mental tools did they use to maintain their resolve? Keep a journal and reflect on these questions. Second, read one detailed history of a major financial crisis or an economic bubble. Books like Charles Kindleberger's Manias, Panics, and Crashes or Edward Chancellor's Devil Take the Hindmost are essential. The goal is to see the repeating patterns of human behavior, the rhymes of history. This will internalize the idea that volatility and crisis are normal, not exceptional. Third, read one work of classical Stoic philosophy, such as the Meditations of Marcus Aurelius or the Letters of Seneca. These texts are essentially training manuals for the mind, teaching you to distinguish between what you can control and what you cannot, and to focus your energy exclusively on the former. This 3-pronged approach, learning from leaders, learning from history, and learning from philosophy, creates a powerful mental armor. It systematically trains you to view turmoil not as a threat, but as an opportunity to practice virtue and rationality. The antithesis of the Stoic reader is the reactive day trader. This individual represents the ultimate surrender of temperament to technology and emotion. Their world is the flickering screen. Their emotional state is directly and completely tethered to the second-by-second movements of the market. A green tick brings a jolt of pleasure and greed. A red tick brings a spike of fear and cortisol. They are not investing based on a long-term view of a business's value. They are gambling on short-term price movements, driven by news, rumors, and algorithmic signals. Their decision-making time frame is not years or decades, but minutes or even seconds. This constant exposure to volatility and noise wreaks havoc on the human nervous system. It keeps the trader in a perpetual state of fight or flight, making calm, rational thought all but impossible. They are guaranteed to fall victim to every cognitive bias in the book. They buy at the peak of a momentum surge, driven by the fear of missing out, and they sell in a panic at the first sign of a downturn, driven by loss aversion. Their entire strategy is a perfect machine for buying high and selling low. It is a life of immense stress, poor health outcomes, and, for the overwhelming majority, inevitable financial ruin. They are a slave to Mr. Market's every whim, while the Stoic reader, like Buffett, is his master. The direct financial connection of a well-cultivated temperament is perhaps the most significant of all. A brilliant strategy is utterly worthless if you lack the emotional fortitude to stick with it during periods of stress. Temperament is the ultimate guardian of your capital and the great enabler of compounding. The financial impact is most visible during market downturns. An investor with a poor temperament will be forced by their own fear to sell their assets at the worst possible time, locking in permanent losses and destroying years of accumulated gains. An investor with a sound temperament, like Buffett, not only avoids this destructive behavior, but is able to take advantage of it. The 2008 financial crisis provides a perfect example. As the global financial system teetered on the brink of collapse and fear was at its absolute peak, Buffett was not selling. He was deploying billions of Berkshire's dollars, making highly favorable investments in iconic companies like Goldman Sachs and General Electric. These were deals that were only available because everyone else was too terrified to act. He was, in effect, being paid for his courage, a courage born of a temperament hardened by decades of reading. Over the long run, this translates directly into a higher compound annual growth rate, CAGR. Every time you avoid a panic sale, you allow the magic of compounding to continue uninterrupted. Every time you are able to buy when others are panicking, you are seeding your portfolio with future returns of an extraordinary magnitude. Temperament, therefore, is not a soft psychological attribute. It is a hard, quantifiable financial advantage of immense power. This brings us to our fifth and final pillar, a concept that encapsulates the profound efficiency of Buffett's method, reading as a time machine, allowing him to learn from the countless mistakes of others. Charlie Munger summed it up perfectly. All I want to know is where I'm going to die, so I'll never go there. This is a witty expression of a deeply serious idea. The most effective way to succeed is not necessarily to learn from your own successes, but to learn from the failures of others. Your own experience is a powerful but painfully limited teacher. Life is too short to make all the mistakes yourself. Reading, however, gives you access to a nearly infinite database of mistakes. It allows you to vicariously experience 1,000 business bankruptcies, 100 market crashes, and the full spectrum of executive blunders, all without losing a single dollar of your own capital. It is the cheapest and most valuable form of education available. To understand this principle, we must examine what Buffett himself considers his greatest investment mistake, the original purchase of Berkshire Hathaway. In 1962, Buffett began buying stock in a failing New England textile company called Berkshire Hathaway. It was a classic cigar butt investment. The company was in a dying industry, its mills were old and inefficient, but its stock was trading for less than its working capital. Buffett saw an opportunity to make a small, quick profit. The CEO at the time, Seabury Stanton, made a verbal agreement to buy back Buffett's shares at a specific price. When the formal tender offer came, however, Stanton had lowered the price by a fraction of a dollar. Infuriated by this perceived slight, Buffett, in a fit of pique, did the opposite of selling. He started buying up shares aggressively until he had control of the entire company, and then he promptly fired Stanton. He had won the battle, but he soon realized he had saddled himself with a terrible business. For the next 20 years, he struggled against the inexorable tide of the textile industry's decline. He poured millions of dollars of good money from his other investments into trying to keep the dying mills afloat, fighting a losing battle against foreign competition and changing technology. He later calculated that this single emotional decision and the subsequent years of trying to fix an unfixable business cost his shareholders hundreds of billions of dollars in opportunity cost, money that could have been invested in wonderful businesses instead of being poured into a black hole. This first-hand experience was a painful but powerful teacher. It taught him the critical lesson that it's far better to buy a wonderful business at a fair price than a fair business at a wonderful price. But here is the key insight for our purposes. While the Berkshire textile mistake was a formative lesson learned the hard way, Buffett's reading allows him to learn thousands of similar lessons the easy way. He pores over the stories of failed businesses, disastrous mergers, and corporate hubris. He reads about CEOs who became obsessed with empire building, who diluted shareholder value through foolish acquisitions, or who failed to adapt to technological change. Each story is a case study, a detailed report from a battle he never had to fight. He is, in effect, downloading decades of hard-won experience directly into his brain. When he analyzes a new investment, his mind is not just operating on his own personal history. It is cross-referencing the situation against a vast mental library of corporate failures. This allows him to see patterns of potential disaster that others, with their more limited set of experiences, might completely miss. He is playing the game with the benefit of having already seen thousands of losing hands. The psychological bias that this practice of studying failure so effectively counters is the pernicious and ever-present survivorship bias. Our culture is obsessed with success stories. Business schools teach case studies of successful companies. The media profiles billionaire entrepreneurs. We read the biographies of winners like Steve Jobs and Jeff Bezos, and try to distill their habits into a simple formula for success. The problem with this is that we don't see the silent graveyard of the failures. For every Steve Jobs, there are 10,000 brilliant and hardworking entrepreneurs whose companies went bankrupt. They may have had the same habits, the same work ethic, the same vision, but they failed due to bad luck, poor timing, or one critical strategic error. By only studying the survivors, we get a dangerously distorted map of reality. We start to believe that success is a simple matter of following a specific recipe, underestimating the enormous role that chance and avoiding fatal mistakes play in the outcome. Buffett's deliberate focus on reading about failures, bankruptcies, frauds, industry collapses is the perfect antidote to survivorship bias. It provides him with the other, much larger, half of the dataset. It gives him a more complete and realistic understanding of the business landscape, highlighting not just the pathways to success, but all the hidden traps, dead ends, and pitfalls that must be avoided along the way. Success is not just about doing the right things. It is, perhaps more importantly, about not doing the wrong things. We can operationalize this powerful concept with a mental model called the pre-mortem reading list. This is a practical exercise to be performed before undertaking any significant new project, whether it's launching a new business, making a major investment, or accepting a new job. A pre-mortem, a term coined by psychologist Gary Klein, is an exercise where you imagine that your project has failed spectacularly, and you work backward to figure out what went wrong. The pre-mortem reading list is the informational fuel for this exercise. The steps are simple. First, clearly define your project. Second, go out and find 3 to 5 detailed stories, books, or in-depth articles about spectacular failures in that exact field or a closely related one. If you're launching a tech startup, read Bad Blood, the story of Theranos' fraud, or a detailed analysis of the fall of a once great company like BlackBerry. If you're considering a big acquisition, read about the AOL-Time Warner merger, one of the greatest corporate disasters in history. Third, as you read, your goal is to identify the root causes of the failure. Was it executive hubris? A failure to understand the customer? A flawed business model? Technological disruption? A toxic culture? Make a list of these failure modes. Finally, conduct your pre-mortem. Imagine it is 1 year from now, and your own project has failed. Write a one-page story of that failure, using the list of failure modes you just compiled. Which of these root causes was the most likely culprit for your own demise? This exercise is incredibly powerful. It forces you to confront the risks of your venture head-on, not in a vague, abstract way, but in a vivid, specific narrative form. It turns the study of other people's failures into a proactive, practical risk management tool for your own success. The antithesis of this approach is the cult of the guru. This is the mindset of someone who, dazzled by survivorship bias, latches onto one successful individual and attempts to slavishly imitate their every move. They listen to one podcast, read one author's books, and adopt their chosen guru's entire worldview as their own. They believe that success is a simple recipe to be copied. They wear the same style of clothing, adopt the same morning routine, and parrot the same phrases as their idol, believing that this mimicry will magically lead to the same results. This approach is not only intellectually lazy, it is incredibly fragile. It ignores the crucial role of context, timing, and luck in the guru's success. It ignores the fact that the guru's public persona is a carefully curated highlight reel that omits all the mistakes, struggles, and lucky breaks. The follower of the guru doesn't build their own understanding from first principles, they just borrow a pre-packaged set of conclusions. As a result, when the environment changes or when they face a problem that isn't covered in the guru's playbook, they are utterly lost. They have learned how to imitate, but they have not learned how to think. By refusing to study the much larger and more instructive world of failure, they condemn themselves to learn only from their own costly and painful mistakes. The direct financial connection of learning from other people's mistakes is the most straightforward of all. It is about risk management and the preservation of capital. In the world of finance and business, a single, unforced error can wipe out a decade of hard work. Every mistake you avoid by reading about it is, in a very real sense, pure, risk-free profit. Think of the immense financial value of the lessons Buffett learned from the Berkshire Hathaway textile mill. That one mistake cost him dearly. But by reading about the struggles of hundreds of other companies in declining industries, he has avoided making that same type of mistake dozens of times over. The cumulative financial benefit is in the hundreds of billions of dollars. This manifests directly on the financial statements of a business as a lower rate of costly write-downs, fewer impairments on bad acquisitions, and a more efficient allocation of capital toward high-return projects. For an individual investor, it results in a portfolio with fewer torpedo stocks, those investments that go to zero and permanently impair your capital base. The greatest long-term financial advantage does not come from making a few brilliant genius-level moves. It comes from the relentless, systematic avoidance of stupidity. By using reading as a time machine to travel into the past and witness the failures of others, you are engaging in the most powerful form of financial risk management there is. You are ensuring that you will be around long enough for the magic of compounding to do its work. You have just navigated the 5 foundational pillars of Warren Buffett's knowledge engine. You have seen how deep reading creates an information arbitrage engine to profit from the market's laziness. You understand the beautiful mathematics of compounding knowledge, turning your mind into an asset of ever-increasing value. You possess the blueprint for building a latticework of mental models, the key to true wisdom and superior judgment. You have explored how reading is a tool for the deliberate cultivation of temperament, forging the emotional steel required to succeed in a volatile world. And you have witnessed how reading can become a time machine, allowing you to learn from 1,000 failures without paying the price. You have just installed a new operating system for your mind. You now possess the core architecture of a system that has generated hundreds of billions of dollars in wealth and a lifetime of clear, rational thought. This is not just a collection of interesting ideas. It is a powerful mental tool that, if applied, will fundamentally change the way you consume information, make decisions, and navigate your career and your life. The value of what you have just learned, of the time you have invested here, is immense. But understanding these 5 pillars is like a master mechanic knowing the intricate design of a car's engine, its transmission, its suspension, its brakes, and its wheels. It's an incredibly powerful and detailed knowledge of the component parts. But it is not the complete vehicle. What is the chassis that holds all of these pieces together? What is the overarching philosophy that connects these pillars and aligns them, allowing them to work in concert to move forward with unstoppable momentum? What is the fuel that makes the entire system run? A system of disconnected parts, no matter how powerful, is ultimately static. A fully integrated system is a force of nature. The video that YouTube is now showing you on your screen is not an accident. Its algorithm, in its own complex way, has analyzed your journey through this deep dive and has identified the next logical step. It has found the missing link in your new mental arsenal. That video holds a key piece of the framework that connects these pillars, the overarching mindset that turns this collection of powerful tactics into a coherent, world-beating life strategy. Most people will stop here. They will feel satisfied with the knowledge they've gained and will click away, their intellectual journey for the day complete. They will possess the powerful parts, but they will never build the machine. But you are not most people. The very fact that you have made it to this point proves you are part of a small minority dedicated to deep learning. The true high-performance mind, the genuine lifelong learner, is never satisfied with the component parts. They demand the complete blueprint. They understand that the real power lies not in the pieces but in their integration. The choice before you is simple. It is an identity-based choice. You can remain someone who has acquired some interesting ideas about success. Or you can click on the video before you and continue your transformation into someone who possesses a complete and devastatingly effective system for thinking and for living. Complete your arsenal. The next piece of the map is waiting.